blue and red lights danced across the rippling surface of Pine Ridge Lake as two police officers stood at the water's edge, examining a series of bright orange plastic poles jutting from the sandy shoreline. Karen Pemberton, the HOA president, waved her arms frantically while insisting she owned half the lake. Officer Thompson held up an official property survey map, his expression growing more skeptical by the second. "My name is Ethan Cooper, and this whole ridiculous saga started 3 weeks earlier when my golden retriever Max and I went for our usual morning swim. We'd been doing this routine for 5 years since I bought my lakefront property in the Pine Ridge subdivision." The water sparkled under the early morning sun as Max paddled happily after his favorite tennis ball, his golden fur creating small ripples across the calm surface. That peaceful morning shattered when I heard the unmistakable screech of Karen Pemberton marching down the slope from her property next door. Her face was already red with fury before she even reached the shoreline. She pointed a manicured finger at Max and announced with absolute authority that my dog was trespassing on her side of the lake. I noticed several bright orange poles with pink reflective tape planted along the water's edge that definitely hadn't been there the day before. Karen claimed these markers showed the exact boundary of her lakefront property and that Max had crossed into her water space at least 3 times during his swim. She waved a piece of paper she insisted was an official HOA document granting her exclusive rights to her section of the lake. When I calmly explained that Pine Ridge Lake was designated as common area for all lakefront homeowners in our deed restrictions, she cut me off with a sharp laugh and declared that as HOA president, she had the authority to reassign water rights. The situation escalated faster than I could have imagined. Karen started screaming at the top of her lungs about property violations and threatened to fine me $500 for each instance of trespassing. She pulled out her phone and began recording Max swimming, narrating dramatically about the dangerous animal violating her private property. Within hours, she had posted the video to our neighborhood Facebook group with a lengthy rant about irresponsible pet owners destroying property values. Her post claimed Max was an aggressive breed who threatened the safety of lakefront residents by invading their space. She included heavily edited photos that somehow made my friendly golden retriever look menacing. The comment section exploded with confusion from neighbors who knew Max as the dog who let toddlers pull his tail at block parties and shared his tennis balls with any pup at the dog park. Karen's campaign against Max intensified daily. She installed motion-activated cameras aimed at the lake and sent me time-stamped photos every time Max's paw touched the water past her imaginary line. She filed formal complaints with the HOA board she controlled, essentially writing violations against me to herself. The fines started arriving in my mailbox, each one more ridiculous than the last. Then came the morning that changed everything. Max and I were enjoying our swim when I heard sirens approaching. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the lake access road, and officers emerged with serious expressions. Karen stood on the shore, gesturing wildly and shouting that there was a dangerous animal in the water refusing to respect property boundaries. She had actually called 911 over a golden retriever fetching a tennis ball. Officer Thompson approached me as I stood waist-deep in the water with Max paddling circles around me. He seemed puzzled as he explained they'd received an emergency call about an aggressive dog threatening a homeowner. Max chose that moment to swim over and drop his soggy tennis ball at the officer's feet, tail wagging hopefully. Officer Ramirez couldn't suppress a small smile as she bent down to pet Max's wet head. Karen launched into a frantic explanation about her property lines and the new boundary markers she'd installed to clearly mark her exclusive water territory. She produced a folder of what she called official documentation, including printouts of HOA meeting minutes where she'd apparently voted by herself to grant herself extended lake rights. The officers exchanged glances as she ranted about the sanctity of private property. Officer Thompson asked to see my property documents, which I gladly retrieved from my house. I returned with the original survey from when I purchased the home, complete with the official seal from Riverside County. The survey clearly showed the lake as common area with specific easements for all surrounding properties. I also pointed out the original metal survey stakes installed by the county, which were still visible about 10 feet away from Karen's plastic poles. The officers decided to investigate further, walking the perimeter of the lake to examine both sets of markers. Officer Ramirez used her radio to contact code enforcement, while Officer Thompson took photos of each orange pole Karen had installed. They discovered the poles were simply pushed into the sand with no concrete footings, and several had already begun tilting from the gentle wave action. Karen's confident demeanor began to crack as the officers spent more time examining her markers. When Officer Thompson knelt down and easily pulled one of the poles out of the ground with one hand, She started stammering about having permits filed with the city. She couldn't produce these permits when asked, instead insisting they were being processed and would arrive any day. The situation took another turn when Officer Ramirez noticed something peculiar about the pink reflective tape on the poles. She recognized it as craft store material, not the official surveyor's tape used for legal boundaries. A quick check of the pole itself revealed a price sticker from Craft Barn, a local hobby shop. Karen's face turned an impressive shade of purple as she tried to explain that she was simply marking the boundaries more clearly for everyone's benefit. Officer Thompson pulled up the official property records on his tablet, confirming what my survey showed. The lake was designated as common area for all Pine Ridge residents with lakefront property. No individual owner could claim exclusive rights to any portion of the water. He then informed Karen that falsifying property boundaries was a serious offense that could result in both criminal charges and civil litigation. The code enforcement officer arrived and conducted his own investigation. He noted that Karen had violated multiple ordinances by installing structures in common area without permits, falsifying property boundaries, and misusing emergency services for a non-emergency situation. He began writing citations while Karen's protests grew increasingly desperate. She tried to claim she was protecting the neighborhood from a dangerous animal, but Max undermined this argument by rolling onto his back for belly rubs from Officer Ramirez. The gathered crowd of neighbors who had been watching from their properties began to whisper among themselves. Several approached the officers to share their own experiences with Karen's overreach as HOA president. Stories emerged of arbitrary fines, made-up violations, and constant harassment over minor issues like mailbox colors and grass height measured to the millimeter. As the citations piled up, Karen made one last attempt to salvage the situation. She declared that as HOA president, she had immunity from local ordinances when acting in the neighborhood's best interest. Officer Thompson calmly explained that HOA positions granted no such immunity and that she would need to appear in court to address the charges. The fines totaled over $3,000 for various violations. The code enforcement officer continued documenting violations, discovering that Karen had also installed no trespassing signs on common area property and had been issuing fraudulent fines to multiple homeowners. Each fake fine she'd collected could be considered theft by deception. The officer added these findings to his report while Karen watched in growing horror. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge, and within an hour, a dozen homeowners had gathered to speak with the officers. Tom Sullivan from 3 houses down brought a folder of bogus fines Karen had issued him for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox. Sarah Chen produced emails where Karen had threatened to place a lien on her property for planting roses that weren't on the approved flower list, a list that apparently only existed in Karen's imagination. The officers realized they were dealing with a pattern of fraudulent behavior. Officer Thompson called for a detective to investigate potential charges of fraud, extortion, and impersonating a government official. Karen had been signing her violation notices with titles like Property Compliance Officer and Regulatory Manager, positions that didn't exist and suggested official government authority she didn't possess. As the detective arrived and began interviewing neighbors, Karen's attempts at damage control became increasingly frantic. She claimed she had been given special enforcement powers at a secret HOA board meeting, but couldn't name any other board members present. She insisted her lakefront boundary extension had been approved by the previous HOA president, who had conveniently moved to Costa Rica and couldn't be reached. The detective examined Karen's craft store poles more carefully and found she had attached laminated cards claiming to be official county markers. This elevated the charges from simple vandalism to criminal impersonation. The fake government seals she'd printed from the internet constituted another felony. Karen watched as evidence bags were filled with her homemade official markers and forged documents. More neighbors arrived with stories and evidence. Karen had apparently been running her own shadow government within Pine Ridge for 2 years, creating elaborate fake committees and charging fees for permits that didn't exist. She had collected over $15,000 in fraudulent fines and fees, all deposited into her personal account rather than the HOA treasury. The detective's expression grew grimmer with